Chris Speaks right back here with Brandon Mosley for our BCS State of Alabama podcast, and we got Danielle Duggar, who is challenging Representative Matt Simpson for the GOP nomination. So, Danielle, how's the campaign going, and what made you decide to challenge an incumbent?
It's going great. I'm excited to do this. It's an honor and a privilege to get out there and talk to all these voters. I'm really enjoying it this time around because I remember how it went last time. I ran against Matt in 2022, so this is my second time challenging him for this seat. Um, so I kind of know a little bit more about what to expect, how long this lasts, how quickly it goes by in the very end. So I'm trying to make the most of each day. But I decided to challenge Representative Simpson for his seat in 2022, primarily because of what we saw during COVID. So when our churches, our schools were locked down, our kids were forced to wear masks, our jobs were threatened if we failed to take an experimental medical procedure that they called the COVID-19 vaccine. I and other conservatives in the state petitioned our legislature for help. You know, we wanted them to pass a bill that would protect our jobs. My husband's job of 16 years was being threatened if he refused to take the vaccine. We had a countdown of when he would be terminated if he failed to take it. And some businesses were not granting religious or medical exemptions. So we asked the legislature to please pass a bill to protect our jobs, and they failed to do so. The protections they passed in SB 9 were temporary. They expired in May of 2023, and there was no penalty associated with the bill if the employer failed to provide a religious or medical exemption. So that's why I ran. I was I was very disturbed by the fact that the legislators cared more about what the lobbying interests at the time wanted than what the people wanted. They had over 300,000 emails sent to them on this one single issue, and we had hundreds of people at the Capitol petitioning, and they refused to listen. So that's
Uh,
why I
Mrs. Duggar, could you tell us something about yourself, where you're from, what you do for a living, or your family does, just so the voters who aren't aware of who you are, can understand a little bit more?
Sure. So I live here in Baldwin County. We're longtime residents, almost 20 years now in Baldwin County. I have three children my husband and I have raised here. So I'm a mom first and foremost. That was my longtime role in their lives, was being their mother. And then later in life, I decided to get into the workforce when my kids had gotten older and they were all in school. So I earned a master's degree in American history, and I was an ACT prep educator for a time, and taught US history as well, and currently work as a legislative analyst for a national nonprofit organization where I'm analyzing bills across all 50 states, anything related to informed consent. So we track these bills and we make sure that states aren't violating individuals' rights to refuse a medical procedure. So that's what I do for a living. But I'm a conservative. It's not just medical freedom that I care about. That's what got me into this race to begin with. But I care deeply about cleaning up our state's education standards, keeping taxes low, protecting parental rights, and making sure Baldwin County remains a great place to live and raise a family.
So, what did you learn from the last race that you're applying this race that you hope to make you successful?
So last time we did really well. I got 44.7% of the vote, 44.9, something like that. So almost 45% of the vote. I had a really successful first run in politics, especially considering I was just a stay-at-home mom at the time, finishing my master's degree. I didn't have any political um, uh, credibility with anyone in the area. No one really knew me involved as far as politics are concerned. I was just in local groups advocating for parental rights and education reform and keeping taxes low. But politically I wasn't involved, so the voters really didn't know who I was. And I think for, being a first time candidate, we did really well. So what I've learned from that truly was that I just needed more time. I campaigned for 2 months. I knocked on 2,000 doors and I spent about $25,000 in that first campaign. So this time around, I learned I need to start sooner. I need to knock on more doors. I need to raise more money and talk to more voters so that I can get my message to them. Because once I'm able to tell them what I stand for, why I'm doing this, they're on board 100%. They're tired of the same old conservative, fake conservatives who say they're Republicans, yet they vote to raise their taxes, restrict their rights, restricting gun rights, voting for casinos, voting for marijuana expansion. Most of the conservatives I talk to, they're not okay with that.
Mrs. Duggar, you said earlier that your husband was on a countdown as to whether he lost his job or not due to his employer's COVID mandate deal. How did that turn out?
So fortunately for my husband, his employer accepted his religious exemption. And then at the last minute, I don't know if you remember, the Supreme Court ruling came down that said they needed to stay all these mandates and these these deadlines because they were concerned about the constitutionality of the OSHA requirement, right? Whether or not OSHA had the authority to do that. So a lot of after they put out that I think it was just a pause, most of the companies in the area or in the state dropped the mandate at the last minute. So it was a countdown to, I believe, December 31st or December something, and we all left for Christmas break thinking we might not have a job when we came back. But thankfully, his employer accepted his religious, and then they dropped the mandate altogether. But that was not before hundreds, if not thousands, at just his place of employment took the vaccine because they were coerced into doing so. They didn't necessarily want to, but they wanted to keep their jobs. And now we've seen the health fallout because of that. We've seen so many people who are injured, who have heart disease, heart inflammation, cancers, autoimmune disease, just horrific injuries, and many who have died. 40,000 so far, 48,000 so far have been reported to VAERS, COVID vaccine deaths. So there have been so many that have died and been injured because of it. And it was horrible that our lawmakers did nothing to prevent it.
So the COVID issue is that's your main beef with Representative Simpson?
No, that was my initial beef, if you want to call it that. And since that time, he has voted to restrict parental rights. He voted against medical freedom. He has voted for gun restrictions, two separate gun restrictive bills in the 2025 session that just show me this is how it's going to be with him in particular, and with many of them in the legislature. They don't care about our freedoms. They're not truly conservative, even though they say they are. I mean, I'm not trying to speak ill of the man himself or of these individuals themselves, but it's the voting record that we need to focus on. And unfortunately, a lot of the voting members of the voting public do not know their voting records. It's difficult to find. So what I do in my job as a legislative analyst, I look through the legislature's websites every day. I'm tracking bills, I'm analyzing them, I'm watching where they move through committee. If they've had a hearing, we look for committee reports. The Alabama legislative website is not user-friendly. And if your typical voter wanted to see how did, let's say, Representative Simpson vote on SB 151, they would have trouble navigating the website to find that. Or let's say they didn't even know the bill number and they want to see how did he vote on that gun bill. They're going to have to Google it, look for the bill number, learn how to navigate the site to enter the bill number into the website, find the bill, find the voting record. It's just a very long process. And it's not easy for the average voter who's never worked on that website before to navigate. They'll take a little training and they'll eventually get there, but it's difficult. It's one of the worst websites that I use, and I use all 50 states plus DC.
In this past session, the legislature passed the Choose Act, allowing some of the money to follow children who just parents decide to send their child to homeschool to a public school outside their, their district or to a homeschool. Or are you supportive of that school choice bill?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's going to be great for parents to just have the flexibility of choosing if they want to send their child to a private school or if they want to use the money for homeschooling, or I think it can even be used for special education services that may not be provided through their insurance or through the school. I believe that might be the Price Act that I'm remembering. That was the initial version of that bill that did not pass, but I think it's great for parents to have a choice. That's what I'm all about. I want them to be able to choose how their child is raised, and that includes education and healthcare.
So you said you're a legislative analyst. Are you familiar with, do they give like rankings like about how conservative the members are? And you know
We
where our
don't because
legislator
we're a nonprofit. So NBIC is a nonprofit. They do not rank legislators. Only a certain percentage of their funding can even go toward lobbying or anything like that. So we're just an educational and advocacy organization, but I am familiar with other entities who rank these lawmakers.
In this past session, the state legislature, the past quadrennium, the legislature cut the state grocery tax from 4% to 2%. Do you support that? And would you support further cutting or eliminating that tax on groceries altogether?
Absolutely, yes. As a conservative, I want the fewest amount of taxes possible and the smallest government possible. So yes, we can reduce it the remaining 2 cents for the state portion. It would be up to the municipalities and the county if they're going to reduce their portion of the state, or I'm sorry, of the grocery tax. But I think it would be in everyone's best interest to remove tax on food completely the way Florida has done.
So down in Baldwin County, that's one of the, I mean, a booming area. What is the biggest issue down there to the voters?
They are very concerned with growth. When I go door to door, that's the one thing that everyone wants to talk about is what they call overdevelopment, rapid development, congested roadways, crowded schools. That's their primary concern. The voters are not happy that what they view as developers gone wild. Now, I believe in property rights. If an individual wants to sell their land to a developer, that's well within their right to do so. But we've got to have some kind of system where we're practicing slowed, responsible growth, where there's got to be a system in place that the developers are contributing to some of this infrastructure needs. I know the city of Daphne is considering an impact fee, a 1% impact fee. The county does not currently have one. That would probably be one of our only options because the mayors will tell you they're not making a lot of money off of the property tax. Where they get their money for roadways is through retail sales tax. So until you have retailers coming into the area, there's just not enough money for the roads. But an impact fee would solve some of that issue. And, it's only fair, in my opinion, that the developers are also contributing to the infrastructure needs of the area. We have some situations in Baldwin County where, some of the school systems are subsidizing portions of the growth and development when they're laying pipes, they're laying the groundwork for these bigger schools. They kind of accommodate the growth that's going to be coming around the area. So the school system pays for that, and then the developer comes in and puts the houses in. That I know has happened a couple of times here in Baldwin County. So we've got to make sure that people can get to where they're going on the roads when we've got these little 2-lane county roads and bridges that are, full grain trucks can't get over. We've got a problem. We are the fastest growing county in the state, and we contribute a large portion of tax to the general fund.
Along those along those same lines, there's a 4,700 acre development near Stockton where they want to do solar panels. Um, I think we all like electricity and want more electricity, but what's your view on, those big solar projects? There's also a bunch of them in Montgomery County.
Right. You know, the AI data centers that are driving the need for the energy increase, the increase in demand, or the potential future increase in demand for the energy consumption is really part of the issue. We've got to have some kind of regulations that control that. Now, currently, I believe those data centers are not regulated, and a lot of areas where they're being built are giving them exemptions from any local regulations and exemptions from tax. So in addition to that, they're going to be using up a lot of resources, energy, water for cooling. That needs to be considered at a state level and federal level. And then the need for the solar farm down in our area, the people around it are upset. And everyone's saying that property owners have the right to sell to Silicon Ranch Valley or Silicon Valley. That's well and good, but the property owners around that area also have rights. And if this is something that's going to impact the environment and impact their property value and impact their way of life, someone needs to consider that as well. We can't just operate purely out of greed. We have to consider people's lives and the environment.
So I want to do a follow-up question with you. You said that you're for low taxes, but then you mentioned an impact fee. Is that not just another term for a tax increase?
No, that's a fee for the developer. Now, whether or not they push that off onto the consumer, that's also, if you think about it, fair, because the consumer is consuming the services in the area. They're buying the home. They have the benefit of living there. That's where they choose to live, if that's where they choose to live. So that part of that fee may be pushed off onto them, but that's not pushed off onto people that aren't choosing to live there. So it's just the price of doing business.
Along those same lines, uh, developers wouldn't build homes if there wasn't families who want to live there.
Oh, yeah.
And so, if we limit development, aren't we limiting, Americans' right to live, their American dream to move to a home in Baldwin County?
We're not limiting development, and nothing I said even, remotely hinted at limiting development. We need to have people paying their fair share. So, an impact fee is not going to stop the developer from building. And our area is very desirable. We have good schools, we have safe communities, we have clean and family-friendly areas that people want to live in. So, no one's limiting. We don't want a moratorium on any building. We just want we want it to be equal, because if we're not charging that, now I'm not saying that's the only solution. I know that's what the city of Daphne has planned to do, and the county may want to consider it. But if we're not charging that, then what will end up happening is that the communities around the development are going to have to see a tax increase to pay for the increased demand in city services and infrastructure needs. That's just the way it goes. So in order to avoid tax increases, they might need to consider something like an impact fee.
Along the same lines with taxes, we've had a large increase in state revenue taxes over the last few years. Have you looked at ways that we could reduce state income tax, or do you think it needs to stay what it is?
So I do have a way. So let me see if I can grab that real quick. There is spoke with a CPA friend of mine. There is something the state can do. So the state of Alabama is one of only 5 states that is non-conforming, meaning we do not use the federal income tax form. Now, because we don't use that federal form, there are deductions and standard deductions that the Alabama citizens are not getting. So their refund or their taxable income, their deductions are going to be a lot lower in the state of Alabama because we're not using this federal form. So, for example, a family who earns $95,000, this is joint married filing jointly in the state of Alabama, they would receive a refund of about $327. If we used the federal form, if we were a conforming state, they would receive a refund of $2,054. So there's a big difference here in what our citizens are paying simply based on us not using this conforming tax form. And that's just one of the things that we could do that would save the average person money, because that's not a lot of money for a married couple these days to be earning and still be able to pay their bills and survive. I mean, it's barely considered middle class right now with inflation and the cost of living. So that could really help a lot of Alabama families in that income bracket.
Will Ainsworth, the current lieutenant governor, um, made a big issue out of six laning I-65. Is that an issue that we should address here in the future, or should people just slow down out there?
I'm not a traffic expert, so this might be above my pay grade, but I think we need to improve our roadways just overall. I would say for my district, for my area, we need to widen Highway 31. That's a major issue, and we need more east and west routes to accommodate some of this traffic. So if we can connect some of these existing roads so we have more offshoots, that'll clear up some of the congestion on Highway 181, Highway 98, 31. These roads that I just listed, these three roads, we're seeing bumper to bumper traffic, usually mornings, midday, and afternoon. It takes an hour and sometimes 20 minutes just to get from my home to my kids' school and back in the afternoons. It is outrageous. So I would love to see more funding here in my district for our roads.
Where do you stand on gambling? I mean, not just the lottery, but sports books, casino, all the whole nine yards.
I'm opposed to gambling. I'm a 100% no vote on changing the Constitution of Alabama to allow class three, which would be the lottery. Folks want a lottery for the state and they want the money to go to education, which, sometimes is a fallacy. It doesn't always happen. And in the last comprehensive gambling bill that they attempted to pass last session, the money was not even allocated for education. But allowing class three gambling in the state, which would require the constitutional amendment, would automatically allow full casinos and others within that class three classification, which is a federal classification, would allow that on our existing gaming areas, like held by Porch Creek and some other areas. So nothing against those folks, but it's not what we want in this community. It's not what I want. It's not what the conservatives want. You're going to see an increase in crime, prostitution, which I hear there has been issues with that in some of our gaming areas, drug trafficking. It's not, and it preys on people, who are stuck in addiction or poverty. So as a Christian, it's just against my moral values, and I can't vote for it.
Going back to my previous discussions, there is talk, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, of extending the Foley Beach Express, where, it goes off at Bucky's, take that road north and create a toll road from there to link up with I-65, I guess, near Perdido.
Yes.
Is that a project the state should be involved in, or would that just bring more beach traffic down there?
it's gonna allow for an easier route for the folks coming from the northern parts of Alabama down to the beaches, and it will alleviate some of the congestion and traffic we have on 59, and some of our routes, because when tourists start coming down to the beach, I mean, you can barely move on the interstate. I-10 is backed up, Highway 59 is backed up. So, I mean, if the state wants to put money in it, look, they're telling us we're going to have to shoulder the cost of the I-10 Bayway. That's a federal bridge. That's a federal road. That's a vital piece of infrastructure that runs from California to Florida, bypassing all of our major ports along the Gulf and strategic military bases. So if they're telling us we've got to pay for that as the state of Alabama and the citizens with our toll, surely, something like connecting 65 down to the beaches would be in the state's interest.
Here in recent years, we've seen like the federal government move closer to decriminalizing marijuana and medical marijuana introduced in the state. Where do you stand on the marijuana issue?
So as a mom, I've already raised a teenage boy. He's 23 and married now, and I've got another teenage boy coming up right now. And I see the issue with kids prior to January, when that new bill went into effect, being able to walk into these vape shops and just pick up THC vape pens. They've got either fake IDs or an older friend who buys it for them. We've just made it so accessible to kids. I can't stand it. The state of Florida, I think, has a good medical marijuana system where it's controlled from seed to sale. They have dispensaries that are actual like pharmacies type dispensary, and the individuals who need it for medical reasons are able to get a prescription medical marijuana card and use that card to purchase the drug that they need. Treated like any other drug, but for medical use. But I don't believe in recreational use. I know I've spoken with some people out in Colorado, and they said that was the worst thing that they ever did in their state was legalize recreational marijuana use. It's really turned the place into a dump. And I don't want to see that here for our family-friendly conservative area. It just doesn't fit what the people want.
Mrs. Duggar, Aniston has recently made a very significant purchase of drones for policing. Are you in supportive of the police being able to maintain 24 hours surveillance through the air with police drones, or is that crossing a privacy line for you?
I mean, that's really depends on what they're doing with those drones. Are they just surveying the entire area and private citizens' lives? Or are they using it under some kind of court order to go and look at a specific location? Are they using it to track, a criminal who's running through the woods and they don't have the man or the dogs to get out there and hunt for them? Is it going to protect police lives in order to use the drone out there, let's say on a rural piece of property looking for the guy? Or are they just using it to, like you said, fly above us and spy on private citizens? That makes a big difference, because I'm 100% against Big Brother. We need privacy rights. I think what happened during the Patriot Act after 9/11 was a travesty. It changed our country. Average citizens no longer have privacy. I mean, the federal government can tap your phone line anytime they want. They're tracking all our data. Facebook is selling off our data to these guys. So our lack of privacy in this country is a major problem already. So it really just depends on their use. Like how are they authorized to use those drones? And if it's for specific purposes and specific areas that will help with a criminal investigation, yeah, absolutely. We've got to help our law enforcement and help them stay safe and use less resources and less money, which ultimately saves the taxpayer dollars. But if they're using it broadly to invade private citizens' privacy, that there's no suspicion or they're not under any court order to look into those people's lives, then no, absolutely not.
With gas prices up to almost $4 a gallon now, have you given any thought about reducing the gas tax that they put on us a few years ago?
I would love to get rid of that thing. They said that was supposed to fund our infrastructure, but we've still got Baldwin County with all of our tourism and all those tax dollars that we're sending up with the gas consumption. Why don't we have the best roads in the state of Alabama? So I would definitely be in favor of reducing taxes. My opponent voted for that gas tax, as did most of the legislature that year. I'd love to get rid of that. I mean, it's hurting us. It's hurting people every day. 10 cents plus goes up every other year for inflation on every gallon. That's a lot of money. So over time, you're putting a lot of money into the state, and what are we getting in return for it?
In this past legislative quadrennium, the legislature made it much more difficult for citizens of Alabama to reach out to their favorite porn sites. You have to like give them a driver's license and whatnot. We have one gubernatorial candidate, Mr. Jamal Brown, who has made that a campaign platform deal that he wants to overturn that. Did the state go too far there, or are you in favor of that anti-porn legislation to prevent kids from
I mean,
accessing porn so easily?
I don't necessarily believe in the nanny state, but come on, we've got to have morality. Um, I believe as a Christian that God will bless us if we abide by his law and his commands. So I don't want children having access to porn. And if that's how they needed to do it, to put in an identification to prove age verification, then that's how they do it. I want children to be protected, and porn is extremely damaging to their minds, to their developing minds. It's damaging to anyone at any age, but what adults do in their private time is what they do. I can't regulate that. That's not our job to regulate how people sin, right? But we've got to protect kids from it. And that's also related to the casino issue. It's not necessarily that we should tell adults what they can and cannot do with their money, but we've got to protect our communities. So the damaging effects of something like a casino in the area would affect families and children and people who don't necessarily gamble.
What do you think about the bill that's making this a closed primary system? Is that limiting people's right to choose who to vote for, or just making a big hassle? Because couldn't somebody just switch over to vote if there was a candidate they wanted to vote for in another
It's
party?
not a perfect system. I mean, surely they can switch over. They do it every day, but um, we're not limiting who can people vote for. The primary is for the party nomination. So in Alabama, we allow people to choose the party nomination. There's systems where the party nominates. So once that individual has been nominated and chosen as the party candidate for the general, then the people get to choose. So if you're invested in the party, you are a registered Republican, you should have a voice and a vote in choosing who your Republican nominee will be for the general election. So I'm grateful that Alabama does that we all get to vote on who these primary candidates will be. But I think only Republicans should be voting for who the Republican nominee should be. That's how we get into this situation in the state of Alabama, where we have a watered down Republican Party. You would not see in a blue state Republicans voting for gun restrictions, voting against medical freedom, voting against parental rights. These bills that I track in the blue states, sponsored by Republican legislators, are strong. They have penalties. They stand for freedom and liberty and conservatism. We've got watered down bills. For example, House Bill, let me pull this up real quick. I believe it was House Bill 2. It was in the legislature in the 2025 session. We had two sets of bills. SB 101 passed. That was the bill that raised the age of medical majority in the state of Alabama. So at the time, it was age 14. A child of the age of 14 could consent to medical, dental, or mental health care without their parents' knowledge or consent, using their parents' insurance, living at home with the parents. They could consent. The parent had no say over it, and they couldn't even find out that information if they called the insurance company to ask, hey, what was this charged for? We got it raised to 16. The original bill said 18. So our Republican legislature majority, super majority, watered it down to 16. There was another version of that bill that was applied to specifically vaccines, whether or not a child could consent to a vaccination at the age of 14. They tried to raise it to 18. My opponent put an amendment on that bill that would expand the number of unemancipated minors who could consent to vaccination without their parents' knowledge or consent. So, what is an unemancipated minor? It's a child who is still the legal responsibility of the parent. They're not emancipated, they're not legally independent. So, why would we expand? First of all, why would we even allow that exception to be in the bill? And then, second, why would we expand that exception to provide a broader classification for children to walk into a doctor's office and tell the doctor, yep, I don't live with my parents, I pay my own bills, and go ahead and get the vaccine without their parents even knowing? When we have stuff like that happening in the state of Alabama, because we have open primaries, because we have non-conservative Republicans running as the Republican nominee, as the ticket, because we've got so many crossing over to vote and water down our choices. But in these blue states, you see strong Republican lawmakers. It's a shame.
Uh, Mrs. Duggar, they had a issue with dredging in the Mobile Bay. I think where we're making the shipping channel wider and deeper so that we can handle those big new super Panama Canal size super container ships. Then they were dumping it back into Mobile Bay. And then like we limited the dredgers, where the dredgers can dump a portion of their dirt. What's your view on that issue?
I think that the dumping is hurting the bay. I talked to these old timers going around the district. I've been to 3,200 houses. And when I speak to some of the folks who have been here for a very long time and they've been fishing these waters for a very long time, they'll tell you that bay used to be clear. The water was crystal clear and beautiful. We've got to make sure that the bay is healthy. And if it's costing them a little bit more money to truck that dirt or ship that dirt off further off, maybe offshore dumping or some of their other options that they had, then that might be the cost of doing business there. We can't just destroy the bay and the ecosystem just to save money or to cut costs and to make the job easier. It's not right. And it's going to affect fishing. It's going to affect our tourism industry. It's going to affect, just people's lives who depend on the health of the bay.
What did you think about the bill to expand the PSC?
So the current bill that they're deliberating over right
Well,
now.
there's two bills. There's a Senate version that would increase it to 7, but wouldn't cap rates or make it, forcing them to have rate hearings. And
Plus
then
the
there's
government.
another one that doesn't expand it, but does cap rates and does force rate hearings and does may require that all the lobbying money that Evan Power spends come out of their profits and not out of their cost of producing power that we pay for through our power bills.
Yeah. Well, look, as a conservative, I'm more for keeping the power within the people and their ability to vote for these members. So packing the board and having 3 appointees, and then the 4th was the governor's pick for like an energy czar or something.
Yeah, I think, okay, if I remember the Gudger bill correctly, there would be a Secretary of Energy appointed by the governor who would be the functional director of the public service
Mm-hmm.
agency, what the commission now heads, and it would be a 7-member commission
Mm-hmm.
that has some authority over setting rates and whatnot, sort of like the parole board.
Mm-hmm.
And they would be on each congressional district would have a PSC commissioner. But when you first create that, of course, they would all be appointed, other than the three elected members we have, now.
And
So it
then when
would
they're
be four out of the seven would be appointed.
yeah.
Of course, in KI, just appointed Cynthia Almond as the president when Twinkle left to go work for the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I see both sides of that issue. I know there were some concerns of, dark liberal money coming in from out of state that would influence the elections to the PSC. And I think that's what triggered the desire to appoint the members completely. But then that bill was shut down. And now they're doing this, which seems like a compromise between the folks who want to see it quote unquote protected and appointed, and those who want it to still remain elected. Um, I'm a conservative. I want to see them as elected positions. If this bill would help, ratepayers, if it's going to make sure that our money isn't being spent on lobbying, that we're not paying for these AI data centers to be run, that those costs are not going to be put off onto the ratepayers. If we will be able to vote for all of those positions in the future, although the governor's appointed person sounds like that would just kind of run the show, and the board would be maybe merely advisory in constitution and what their authority is. I'm not sure, but I'm not entirely in favor of it. It sounds like we're growing government, and as a conservative, I'm not a fan of that. But we've got to have a way to protect ratepayers and not have all of us paying for the increased costs for the AI data centers.
As an educator, what do you think should be done to improve on the gains we've made in our educational system over the last few years?
Yeah, so I think the gains they're referencing are the, most increased, which just means that we were at the bottom and now we're not necessarily at the bottom. I've seen
They were now
proficient.
number 32.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're 32, but I've seen some proficiency ratings of 28% proficiency rating in reading, and I think it was like 30 something in math. I'd have to pull up that email to tell you exact numbers, but it's not great. What we need to do to clean up education is remove Common Core from our state education standards. We are still currently using Common Core math and reading in our elementary schools education standards, and that's holding our kids back. It's frustrating our teachers, it's frustrating our parents, and it's costing the state hundreds of millions of dollars each year to prop up this Common Core math. For example, the Numeracy Act that passed, that's 150 million a year. Those numbers might have even gone up since that was first implemented, but that part of that, they're sending out math tutors to help tutor the teachers, the elementary school teachers, in this weird backward Common Core math. So if you look at all of our textbooks in the school systems, they're all Common Core aligned. And if you look at the Common Core standards side by side with our Alabama College and Career Ready standards, you will see line by line, they're nearly identical. That's why you sit down and do math with your child and you are pulling your hair out. You don't understand how they're getting 1 + 1 = 2. They're going around, in all over the place to get to that result, when really what they're skipping, what they're avoiding is memorization. And as children develop, their brain best understands and retains knowledge through memorization. That's why we recite nursery rhymes to kids when they're little. That's why we do memory games and recite the alphabet. That's how kids learn. Their brains absorb. That's why they like to watch the same TV show over and over, even though it's repetitive. They learn through repetition and memorization. So when we remove times tables, when we remove memorizing math facts, or learning phonics and we replace it with sight words and Common Core math, we're going against the way children's minds develop. We're causing confusion and we're making things harder than they need to be. Common Core was a failure nationwide, and Alabama is one of the last states to abandon it. We have yet to abandon it. We could definitely clean up education in that aspect.
Alabama, has really low unemployment. I think the current rate's somewhere like 2.4%. But then when you look at the workforce participation rates, only about 56% of Alabama adults are in the workforce. We're one of the lowest states there. The legislature in the last couple of years has, really looked at, trying to get like students in high school, on like a career path and, maybe subsidizing daycare so more moms could leave the kids at the state daycare center instead, so you go take a job. Or maybe do something to push some people off of welfare, so maybe they'll go get a job. Um, is is the workforce participation rate what's holding the state back, or is this just the legislature just bringing in more employers than we can possibly fill the jobs for?
I mean, we told a whole generation of kids that they had to go out and get a 4-year degree or they wouldn't be successful. And I think we made a big mistake doing that. We've got to focus more on getting these workforce training into the high schools, like what they did with the Baldwin Prep Academy. We need to have something similar to that in every district, in every area, for these kids so that they can learn these skills we need so when they graduate they enter the workforce rather than sitting in college for 4 years, 6 years or more to learn to earn a degree and then get back and not have anywhere to work. I have two graduate degrees and one undergrad, and the jobs I was looking at were willing to pay me about $25 an hour. So, it's not always a good return on investment. And we've got to give kids options so that we're going to have electricians and plumbers and welders and carpenters and landscapers and auto mechanics. We need these people. And if we're giving them these skills, we're going to have a trained workforce coming up once they graduate and enter an apprenticeship and get some on the job training. We're going to have a more skilled workforce. I like what the state did in requiring, or I'm sorry, was it the state or the federal government in requiring work? No, I believe it was the state, work criteria in order to receive benefits. So we increased that criteria. They had to be seeking a job or work minimum hours in order to receive benefits. So, that's a step in the right direction. We can't just be handing out benefits to people who are not even trying to better themselves. But that goes back to New Deal nonsense and when we started this whole welfare state. And I believe that was a bad move for our country, but there's no undoing it now. So we've got to make sure that people have the skills they need to get into the workforce and that we're not subsidizing individuals who simply just don't want to work.
Derek, we've had you almost 50 minutes. I think that's all I've got, unless Brandon's got some more questions. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
No, me?
Yeah, anything that you would like to add that we really haven't covered? And we've covered a lot here.
We covered a lot. So like I said, I am a conservative. I'm a no vote on gambling. I want to protect parental rights. I want to protect that Choose Act that we passed so that the individuals who are receiving benefits from that now can continue to do so and not have any extra government hoops that they'd have to jump through. So make sure that the legislature doesn't add any criteria to that the parents and schools may not want to meet. We want to make sure that we keep taxes as low as possible. Our consumption tax in the state is pretty high. Property tax is low, but consumption is pretty high. And we need to protect our veterans. We have a very large veteran population in this state, and we're not doing enough for them. And the debacle that took place last year with the Veterans Board and Kay Ivey and Admiral Kent Davis, it was shocking, to say the least. So we've got to do better for our veterans in this state. And I would love to fight for these things in the legislature as a true conservative.
Duggar, thank you so much for speaking with us today, and good luck in your election.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you for becoming on.
Yes. Bye-bye.